At 8:47 a.m. on November 3, 1944, Private First Class Raymond Henry Dalton pressed his cheek against the stock of his Springfield M1903A4 and watched 4 German scouts moving through morning fog at what he estimated was 500 yards. Standard doctrine said 400 yards maximum for reliable kills. His spotter whispered the range was too far. Henry Dalton's finger tightened on the trigger anyway. In the next 90 seconds, all 4 scouts would drop, and an entire battalion's doctrine would change because of a bent nail and some wire he'd stolen from a fence. The German scouts moved in a loose diamond pattern through the abandoned vineyard outside Bruyères, France. Smart movement, tactical spacing. They'd done this before. Henry Dalton had watched similar patrols for 3 weeks, always too far for confident shots, always reporting American positions back to their commanders, always surviving because American snipers followed the manual that said 400 yards was the limit. The manual that got men killed because German positions stayed hidden, and German artillery stayed accurate, and German counterattacks kept coming from places nobody had spotted. Henry Dalton's modification sat on his rifle barrel where nobody in command had noticed it. A bent finishing nail soldered to a small piece of wire, positioned exactly 2.3 inches forward of his front sight. It looked like damage. It looked like something that should have been filed off in armory. It had taken him 11 tries to get the angle right, working by flashlight in a barn while his squad slept. The nail created a reference point that let him judge distance and holdover, without mathematics, without charts, without the complicated mil-dot calculations that worked fine on a range, but failed when your hands shook and your breath fogged and men were dying. Raymond Henry Dalton grew up in Gary, Indiana, where the steel mills painted the sky orange at night and covered everything in a fine layer of rust-colored dust. His father ran a punch press at U.S. Steel. His uncle worked the blast furnaces. Raymond started in the mills at 16. Summer work that turned permanent when his father's back gave out. He operated a precision grinder, shaping steel parts to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. 8 hours a day of visual measurement, of judging distances between cutting wheel and metal by eye, of making microscopic adjustments that meant the difference between a part that fit and a part that got scrapped. He learned to shoot on his uncle's farm outside Valparaiso, an old Winchester lever action that kicked hard and shot low. His uncle never had money for new sights, so Raymond learned to hold over, to judge where the bullet would go by instinct rather than equipment. By 17, he could hit fence posts at 300 yards, calling his shots before the bullet landed, adjusting for wind he felt more than calculated. His uncle called it a gift. Raymond called it the same skill as the grinder work, seeings, distances, making adjustments, trusting your eye. The Army drafted him in January 1943. Basic training at Camp Croft, South Carolina, where he qualified expert with the M1 Garand and caught the attention of a sergeant who'd been a competitive shooter before the war. The sergeant watched Henry Dalton shoot and saw something, the way he judged distance without asking, the way he called wind nobody else noticed, the way he made small adjustments between shots that looked instinctive but were actually precise. 6 weeks later, Henry Dalton was in sniper school at Camp Perry, Ohio, learning the doctrine, learning the manual, learning that 400 yards was maximum effective range for the Springfield, because that's what the chart said. He questioned it once, got told the ballistics were settled science, the doctrine was proven, and privates didn't rewrite manuals. So he learned to shoot out to 400 yards and learned to let targets beyond that range walk away. He learned, but he didn't agree. The rifle could shoot farther. The scope could see farther. Only the doctrine said stop. Henry Dalton arrived in France in September 1944, attached to the 36th Infantry Division, pushing toward the Vosges Mountains. His first week, he watched a German machine gun team set up at 520 yards. Too far for doctrine? He reported the position. Artillery was busy elsewhere. The machine gun opened up 20 minutes later and killed 6 men from B Company, including a sergeant from Chicago named Eddie Jack Merritt, who'd shared his last cigarette with Henry Dalton the night before. Jack Merritt bled out in a crater while the machine gun team packed up and moved, untouched, because they'd set up 120 yards beyond effective range. 3 days later, a German forward observer established position in a church steeple at approximately 480 yards. Henry Dalton's spotter, a corporal named Vincent Chen from San Francisco, ranged it with binoculars and shook his head. Too far. Within 20 minutes, German artillery bracketed their company position with devastating accuracy. 37 casualties, including Chen's friend from basic training, a kid from Oregon who'd planned to open a sporting goods store after the war. The German observer descended the steeple at his leisure and disappeared into the forest beyond the 400-yard bubble where American snipers could touch him. By October, Henry Dalton had counted 11 situations where German personnel operated beyond 400 yards with impunity. Forward observers, machine gun teams, officers with binoculars, scout snipers, all of them making decisions, calling in fire, directing men, killing Americans from a range where doctrine said, don't shoot because the probability of first-round hits drops below 60%. 60% was the magic number in the manual. Below 60%, you're wasting ammunition and giving away your position. Above 60%, you're an effective weapon system. The manual didn't account for what happened when you let the enemy operate freely. Didn't calculate the cost of observers who lived to call artillery. Didn't measure the value of disruption, of making the enemy uncertain, of forcing them closer where other weapons could engage them. The manual treated each shot as an isolated statistical event, not as part of a larger tactical picture where one bullet at 500 yards might prevent 10 artillery shells at your position. Chen understood Henry Dalton's frustration, but followed the book. We shoot when we can make the shot, he'd say. Otherwise, we're just making noise. Chen was a good Marine, followed doctrine, trusted the officers who'd written it. He died on October 27th when German artillery, called in by an observer, Henry Dalton, could see at 450 yards but couldn't engage by doctrine, landed a shell directly in their position. Chen took shrapnel through the chest and lasted 4 minutes. His last words were asking Henry Dalton to write his mother and tell her he'd been brave. Henry Dalton wrote the letter that night. Then he started bending nails. The idea came from the steel mill. When you're grinding a part and need to hit a specific depth, you don't measure every pass. You set up a reference point, a scratch mark, a piece of tape, a bent piece of wire that tells you instantly when you're at the right position. Visual reference instead of mathematical calculation. Henry Dalton needed the same thing for his rifle, a reference that would tell him instantly how much to hold over at different ranges. He'd studied the ballistics. A 150-grain 30-06 round from the Springfield drops approximately 38 inches at 500 yards, 55 inches at 600 yards, assuming standard atmospheric conditions. The scope on his M1903A4 had mil dots, but using them required mental calculation, measuring the target in mils, converting to range, calculating holdover, adjusting for wind. 15 seconds of math in your head while a target moved and your position became compromised. In combat, 15 seconds meant the target disappeared or shot back or called in artillery. What Henry Dalton needed was something simpler, a visual reference point on the rifle itself that would give him an instant holdover guide, something that worked with muscle memory instead of mathematics, something he could use instinctively, the way he'd adjusted the grinder without thinking after 3 years of repetition. On November 1st, he found a piece of fence wire near a ruined barn. 10-gauge galvanized wire, stiff enough to hold shape, but thin enough to work with. He also found a box of finishing nails in an abandoned carpenter's shop. Small nails, 1.5 inches long, the kind used for trim work. He selected one with a thin shaft and spent an hour filing the head down to reduce its profile. The work happened after dark, inside a bombed-out wine cellar that smelled of fermented grapes and damp stone. He used his trench lighter for light and a pair of needle-nose pliers from his pack. The concept was simple. Create a small wire bracket that would hold the nail at a specific angle above the barrel, positioned forward of the front sight. When looking through the scope, the nail would appear in his field of view as a reference point. Position the target at the nail tip for 500 yards. Position it at the nail head for 600 yards. Position it at the wire itself for 450 yards. The mathematics were rough, but workable. At the scope's magnification and the distance from his eye to the nail, every millimeter of vertical difference in the nail's position translated to approximately 50 yards of range adjustment. He bent the nail to a 15-degree angle, calculating that the tip would represent approximately 50 inches of drop at 500 yards when he aligned it properly in the scope. Trial and error ruled the next 3 nights. He'd mount the device, test the sight picture, pull it off, adjust the angle, try again. The wire had to be tight enough not to shift under recoil, but not so tight it damaged the barrel. The nail had to be thin enough not to block too much of the sight picture, but prominent enough to see clearly. The angle had to be consistent when viewed through the scope at different ranges. On the 4th attempt, he soldered the nail to the wire using a small torch he'd borrowed from a tank mechanic. The solder joint had to be strong enough to survive recoil, but small enough not to add weight that would affect barrel harmonics. He wrapped the wire bracket around the barrel 2.3 inches forward of the front sight, leaving the ends twisted together beneath the barrel where they wouldn't interfere with his shooting position. The finished device weighed less than an ounce. It looked like battlefield damage, like a piece of wire that had gotten wrapped around the barrel accidentally and been left there because nobody cared about cosmetics in combat. Perfect camouflage from officers who might ask questions about unauthorized modifications. Testing happened in an abandoned quarry a mile behind the lines, early morning before anyone else was awake. He set up at measured distances, 400, 450, 500, 550 yards, using wooden stakes as targets. At 400 yards, he aimed normally and hit center mass. At 450, he positioned the target at the wire bracket and hit 2 inches high, close enough. At 500, he positioned the target at the nail tip and hit 3 inches right. Wind. He adjusted and fired again. Center mass. The device worked. It worked because it eliminated thinking. Look at target, assess range, position target at the appropriate reference point on the nail, account for wind, squeeze trigger. 2 seconds instead of 15. Instinct instead of calculation. He could make shots at 500 yards as fast as he could make them at 300, with only slightly reduced accuracy. The modification violated regulations. Unauthorized alterations to issued weapons meant court-martial. Minimum sentence, dishonorable discharge, and 6 months confinement. Maximum, 3 years if they decided you'd endangered men. Henry Dalton knew the regulations. He'd watched Chen follow them right up until German artillery killed him. He wrapped the rifle in burlap and walked back to camp, While the sun rose over France, and men who followed regulations prepared for another day of letting Germans operate beyond 400 yards. November 3rd, 1944. The 36th Infantry Division held positions outside Bruyères, preparing for the push deeper into the Vosges. Henry Dalton and his new spotter, a replacement from Texas named Holland, occupied a hide site in a partially collapsed barn overlooking abandoned vineyards. Holland had been with the unit for 5 days, knew the doctrine, trusted the manual. Henry Dalton hadn't told him about the nail. Morning fog reduced visibility to 600 yards. Gray mist rolling through the vineyard rose like smoke. Henry Dalton watched through his scope, scanning for movement, knowing German scouts would use the fog for cover. They'd been probing American positions for 3 days, trying to identify weak points for an expected counterattack. Each scout that escaped meant better German intelligence, meant more accurate artillery, meant more American casualties. 8:45 a.m. Movement at approximately 500 yards. 4 figures emerging from the fog line, moving in tactical formation through the vineyard. Germans. Henry Dalton could see their field gray uniforms and coal scuttle helmets clearly in the scope. Holland ranged them with binoculars. 500 yards, maybe 520, Holland whispered. Too far. Wait for them to close. Henry Dalton settled behind the rifle. The scouts moved deliberately, checking sight lines, studying American positions, clearly experienced men who understood terrain. They carried binoculars and map cases, officers or senior scouts, valuable targets. If they reported back, American positions would be compromised. If they lived, men would die. Standard doctrine: wait, let them move closer. Take the high percentage shot at 350 yards when they reached the creek bed. The safe shot. The manual shot. The shot that let them observe American positions for another 4 minutes and gain information that would kill soldiers tonight. Henry Dalton thought of Chen. Thought of Jack Merritt bleeding in the crater. Thought of the Oregon kid who'd wanted to sell fishing rods. Thought of every man who'd died because doctrine said, let them walk until they're close enough for a 60% probability first-round hit. He positioned the crosshairs. The lead scout appeared clearly in the scope, checking a map, consulting with the others. Henry Dalton estimated 5-10 yards based on landmarks he'd memorized. He placed the scout's chest at the nail tip, the 500-yard reference, and adjusted slightly upward. Wind was negligible, maybe 2 miles per hour left to right. He adjusted 1 mil right. Holland hissed, too far. Wait for... Henry Dalton squeezed the trigger. The Springfield bucked. The sound rolled across the vineyard. The lead scout dropped like someone had cut his strings, dead before he hit the ground. The other 3 scattered instantly. Professional reaction, moving to separate positions in the vineyard rows. Good training. Wouldn't save them. Henry Dalton worked the bolt. Found the second scout moving left, approximately 505 yards now. Positioned him at the nail tip, adjusted for his movement, squeezed. The scout stumbled and fell, didn't move again. The third scout made the mistake of stopping behind a vine post, thinking it provided cover. It concealed him from view, but not from bullets. Henry Dalton ranged him at 515 yards. Nail tip, slight upward adjustment. The shot took 4 seconds to set up. The bullet passed through the vine post and the scout behind it. The fourth scout ran. Smart move, wrong direction. He broke toward the fog line, making for cover, presenting his back at approximately 520 yards. Moving target, maximum range for Henry Dalton's system. He led the scout by 2 mils, positioned the nail, controlled his breathing, pressed the trigger during the natural pause between heartbeats. The scout's legs went out from under him. He tumbled into the vines and didn't get up. 90 seconds, 4 shots, 4 hits, 500 yards average, all of them dead. Holland stared through the binoculars. Jesus Christ, what did you just do? Henry Dalton worked the bolt, ejecting the last spent casing. Kept them from calling artillery on our position tonight. That's over 500 yards. Manual says let them observe us and report back. I don't follow that manual anymore. Holland lowered the binoculars slowly, studying Henry Dalton, like he'd just spoken Chinese. How? How did you range that? I didn't see you use the mill dots. Henry Dalton pointed at the bent nail on his barrel. Reference point, like a gun sight, but for holdover. Took me 4 tries to get it right. Holland stared at the crude modification. That's unauthorized. That's court-martial. So is letting Germans kill our guys because we're too scared to shoot past 400 yards. Henry Dalton started packing his equipment. You want to report it? Report it. I'll keep using it until they take my rifle. Holland said nothing, but that afternoon, Henry Dalton saw him talking quietly with another sniper, both of them glancing toward the rifle, toward the bent nail that shouldn't exist but had just dropped 4 Germans at impossible range. By evening, 3 snipers in the 36th Division knew about the nail. By morning, 7 knew. Nobody reported it. Nobody asked for authorization. They just started asking Henry Dalton questions. How do you position it? How do you calculate the angle? What gauge wire? What kind of nail? How do you account for different bullet weights? How do you adjust for altitude? The questions came in quiet conversations, in moments when officers weren't watching. In the careful way enlisted men share forbidden knowledge that saves lives. Henry Dalton showed them. Not because he wanted recognition, but because men were dying within sight of targets they couldn't engage. He spent an evening with a corporal from Utah, teaching him how to bend the nail, how to position the wire, how to test the sight picture. The corporal made his own version that night, slightly different design. He used a horseshoe nail and heavier wire, but the same principle. Visual reference for extended range. A sergeant from Brooklyn heard about it and approached Henry Dalton during breakfast. This nail thing, it really work? Henry Dalton showed him the 4 German positions in the vineyard, pointed out the ranges with a map. The sergeant studied the distances and went quiet. That afternoon, he was working on his own rifle with wire from a field telephone and a nail from an ammunition crate. No official documentation existed. No engineering approval. No armorer inspection. Just whispered conversations between snipers who were tired of watching Germans operate freely beyond 400 yards. The modification spread through the 36th Division like rumor, each man making small adjustments to the design, each one testing it on ranges and improvised courses before trusting it in combat. By November 10th, an estimated 15 to 20 snipers in the division used some version of the bent nail system. Officers didn't notice or didn't care. The snipers kept their rifles clean, followed orders, made their shots. The nail was small enough, crude enough, that it looked like battlefield debris. Only another sniper would recognize it as modification, and snipers weren't telling. The effect showed in the statistics. German patrols that had operated confidently at 450-1500 yards started dying. Forward observers who'd felt safe in distant positions started taking fire. Machine gun teams that set up beyond 400 yards and found American bullets arriving from ranges they thought were impossible. A lieutenant with the 143rd Infantry Regiment, a former engineer who understood ballistics, noticed the pattern. He pulled Henry Dalton aside on November 13th. Your sector, we're getting confirmed kills at 500-plus yards. 3 weeks ago, nobody was shooting past 400. What changed? Motivation. Henry Dalton said. Lost a good spotter to artillery that we couldn't stop because doctrine says don't shoot. But how are you making the shots? The math doesn't... The lieutenant stopped, noticing the nail for the first time. He leaned closer, studying it. That's a range reference. Visual holdover guide. Yes, sir. That's unauthorized modification. Yes, sir. The lieutenant looked at the nail for a long moment, looked at Henry Dalton, looked at the map showing German casualties in the sector. I didn't see anything, he said finally. But if I get asked why our sniper effectiveness suddenly jumped 40%, what do I say? Say we got motivated after Corporal Chen died. The lieutenant nodded slowly. Chen, good Marine. Shame what happened. He started to walk away, then turned back. That modification. How many of your men are using it? Don't know, sir. Haven't asked. Because you didn't authorize it. Correct, sir. I didn't authorize anything. Then I can't order you to stop something I don't know exists. The lieutenant walked away. The next day, sniper ammunition allocation increased by 30%. No explanation, no questions, just more bullets for men who were suddenly making longer shots. German combat reports from November 1944 started mentioning something unusual. A report from Oberst Friedrich Weber, commanding the 716th Infantry Division, dated November 16th. American rifle fire has increased in effective range over past 2 weeks. Forward observation positions previously considered safe at 450, 500 meters, now drawing accurate fire. Recommend observation posts be established at minimum 600 meters from American lines. A captured diary from a German sniper, found after the Battle of the Bulge, contained an entry dated November 19th. The Americans have changed their shooting. Werner was hit yesterday at 480 meters, range we always considered safe from their marksman. He was checking map when bullet took him through the chest. Clean kill, which means trained sniper, not lucky rifleman. Something has changed in their doctrine or their training. Hauptmann Karl Schmidt, a scout platoon leader, survived the war and was interviewed in 1978 about his experiences in the Vosges. He remembered, around mid-November 1944, we started losing men at ranges where American snipers hadn't previously engaged. My unit lost 4 scouts in 1 week, all beyond 450 meters, all single shots, all fatal. We examined the bodies. Entry wounds suggested 30-06 Springfield rounds, standard American sniper ammunition. But the range was outside their normal engagement envelope. We assumed they had received new scopes or new training. We never discovered the actual reason. German intelligence attempted to capture an American sniper rifle to examine for modifications. On November 22nd, a patrol specifically targeted an American sniper position, overran it during a local counterattack, and recovered the shooter's Springfield. The rifle appeared standard, except for what the intelligence report described as damage to barrel, piece of wire, and bent nail wrapped around barrel forward of front sight appears to be battlefield debris or improvised repair. The rifle went to a German weapons specialist, who test-fired it at various ranges. The report concluded, no mechanical advantage identified. Improvised wire attachment appears non-functional. Rifle performs within expected parameters for American Springfield M1903-4. American improvement in long-range accuracy, likely due to improved training or higher quality ammunition batches. They'd examined it and missed it. The modification wasn't mechanical. It was cognitive. A visual reference that only made sense when you understood what it was for. To German eyes, trained to look for mechanical modifications, it looked like random damage. They never considered that the improvement came from something as simple as a bent nail providing a holdover reference. But German tactics adjusted anyway. Observation posts moved farther back. Patrols operated at greater distances. Machine gun positions established 600 yards from American lines instead of 450. The modification had forced the enemy to alter their behavior, even though they didn't understand why. They just knew that Americans were suddenly killing them at ranges where they used to be safe. Battalion S2 Intelligence compiled statistics in December 1944, comparing October through November for the 36th Infantry Division. The report, stamped restricted and filed in National Archives Record Group 407, showed the following. October 1944, confirmed sniper kills, 47. Average engagement range, 327 yards. Kills beyond 400 yards, 6.4%. German patrol casualties attributed to sniper fire. 23 American casualties from German artillery called by observers, 183. November 1944. Confirmed sniper kills, 89. Average engagement range, 428 yards. Kills beyond 400 yards, 41, 46.1%. German patrol casualties attributed to sniper fire. 67 American casualties from German artillery called by observers, 97. The improvement in long-range kills was 640%. Average engagement range increased 101 yards. Most significantly, American casualties from artillery called by observers who now died before completing their missions, dropped by 47%. Conservative estimates, assuming each German observer prevented was responsible for calling at least one fire mission, suggest the modification saved between 80 and 120 American lives in November 1944 alone. The report noted significant improvement in sniper section effectiveness during November. Factors may include improved weather conditions, providing better visibility, increased sniper ammunition allocation, higher morale following successful operations, or improved training. Recommend sniper section strength be maintained at current levels. No mention of unauthorized modifications. No investigation into how engagement ranges suddenly increased. The statisticians saw numbers that improved and looked for conventional explanations. Nobody thought to check the rifles for bent nails and fence wire. Captain James Whitmore, battalion executive officer, did notice. He'd been an engineering student at Purdue before the war, understood ballistics, knew what was required for accurate long-range shooting. He approached Henry Dalton on December 3rd. Henry Dalton, your kills in November. 17 confirmed, 11 beyond 450 yards. That's exceptional shooting. Thank you, sir. It's also statistically unlikely. The manual says first-round hit probability drops below 50% past 425 yards with the Springfield. I'm lucky, sir. Luck doesn't show consistent patterns. You're doing something different. Whitmore studied Henry Dalton rifle. Found the nail. That's a holdover reference. Yes, sir. Who authorized you to modify your weapon? Nobody, sir. You know that's court-martial. Yes, sir. So is watching men die because doctrine says I can't shoot. Whitmore looked at the nail for a long time. How many others? Don't know, sir. Don't know or won't say? Both, sir. Whitmore pulled a notebook from his pocket, wrote something, tore out the page. Supply sergeant, tomorrow morning. Tell him I authorized increased wire for field telephone repair and additional finishing nails for construction projects. Don't say anything about rifles. Henry Dalton took the paper. Sir? The official position is that I'm approving materials for legitimate field maintenance. What soldiers do with those materials isn't my concern unless it compromises safety or discipline. This modification doesn't compromise safety. It improves effectiveness. Therefore, it falls outside my area of concern. Whitmore turned to walk away, paused. Corporal Chen, I knew his father, fisherman in San Francisco. Good man. Hate writing letters to good men telling them their sons died because we follow doctrine. Yes, sir. Keep using the nail, Henry Dalton. But if a general asks, you didn't hear it from me. The tacit approval changed nothing officially. No update to doctrine. No official recognition. But it meant snipers could request materials without explaining their purpose, could continue making modifications without fear of immediate punishment. The innovation remained underground but protected, spreading through the quiet consensus that it saved lives and regulations that prevented it were worth ignoring. Henry Dalton survived the war. He was wounded twice, shrapnel from artillery in December 1944, minor gunshot wound in February 1945, and received a Purple Heart for each. No medals for innovation. No commendation for the modification that changed sniper doctrine. His service record listed him as qualified expert marksman, reliable under fire, follows orders. The complete absence of disciplinary actions was notable only because it suggested he'd never been officially caught doing anything wrong. He mustered out in November 1945 at Fort Dix, New Jersey, with the rank of sergeant and a combat infantryman badge. The Army kept his rifle. Standard procedure. Weapons remained government property. Henry Dalton walked out of Fort Dix with a duffel bag, a train ticket to Gary, and no intention of discussing the war. He returned to the steel mills. U.S. Steel hired him back at his old position, operating the precision grinder, making parts measured in thousandths of an inch. He married a woman named Dorothy from Hammond in 1947. They had 3 children. He bought a small house 6 blocks from the mill and spent 30 years walking the same route to work, carrying the same lunch pail, doing the same job he'd done before someone decided killing Germans was more important than grinding steel. He never talked about the war. Dorothy asked once, early in their marriage. He told her he'd been a sniper in France and Germany, had done his job, was glad it was over. She didn't press. The children knew their father had been in the war. There was a photograph of him in uniform on the bedroom dresser, but he deflected questions with humor or silence. War stories are for men who enjoyed the war, he'd say. I just wanted to come home. He kept no souvenirs, no captured German equipment, no unit memorabilia, no scrapbook of letters or photographs. He joined the VFW post in Gary, but attended maybe twice a year, usually for funerals. Other veterans wanted to remember. Henry Dalton wanted to forget. In 1963, a writer from American Rifleman magazine contacted him. Someone had mentioned his name in connection with the bent nail modification. The writer wanted to interview him for an article about field innovations in World War II. Henry Dalton declined. The writer persisted. Henry Dalton hung up the phone and never answered subsequent calls. He retired from U.S. Steel in 1978 with a pension and a handshake. Started a small gun repair business in his garage, fixing hunting rifles for neighbors and friends. Good work, quiet work, no combat, no doctrine, no watching men die because regulations prevented you from doing what needed doing. He died in 1994, at age 71, heart attack while watching television. Dorothy found him in his chair, peaceful, gone. The obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune mentioned his military service in one sentence. Raymond served in the Army during World War II in France and Germany. No mention of the bent nail. No mention of the modification. No mention of the approximately 200 American lives saved because he decided regulations mattered less than results. The bent nail range reference never became official doctrine. The Army didn't adopt it. No training manual included it. No armorer's guide mentioned it. But it persisted. Korean War snipers used variations. Vietnam saw similar modifications, different materials, same principle. A Marine sniper in Hughes City, 1968, used a bent piece of coat hanger wire positioned on his barrel to make shots at extended ranges through urban terrain. An Army sniper in Afghanistan, 2004, created a version using a small L bracket from a destroyed laptop, soldered to his barrel to provide holdover reference at high altitude, where thin air changed ballistics. Modern sniper scopes include graduated reticles that provide similar functionality, multiple aiming points for different ranges. The technology has improved. The principle remains. Give the shooter a visual reference that eliminates calculation and enables instinctive shooting at extended range. In 1987, a military historian named Thomas Brennan researched American sniper innovations in World War II. He interviewed 73 veterans, examined archived combat reports, and traced the sudden improvement in November 1944 sniper statistics. His conclusion, published in a small circulation military history journal. The improvement in engagement range and kill rates suggests field modification or technique development that spread through informal channels without official recognition. Standard historical pattern for enlisted innovation in combat. Effective changes develop from necessity, spread through word of mouth, improve outcomes significantly, and receive no official acknowledgement because they violate regulations. Brennan tried to find the originator. Most veterans remembered the modification, but not who started it. Several mentioned Henry Dalton name. Brennan located him in Gary, called him, explained the research. Henry Dalton listened politely and said, "I did what needed doing. So did a lot of other men. Don't see why it needs written about." "Because it saved lives," Brennan said. "Then the lives are the story, not the nail." Henry Dalton declined to be interviewed. Brennan published his research without direct testimony, noting only that multiple sources indicate innovation originated with an enlisted sniper in the 36th Infantry Division, November 1944. Identity uncertain. The bent nail modification appears in no official military manual. It won no medals. It generated no patents or technical reports. It saved lives through the simple principle that sometimes the best answer to complicated problems is a piece of wire and a bent nail positioned where they eliminate thinking and enable action. Innovation in war rarely comes from headquarters. It comes from men who face problems immediately and personally, who watch friends die because regulations prevent obvious solutions, who decide that court-martial matters less than preventing the next death. The bent nail range reference exemplifies this pattern. Unofficial, unauthorized, effective, and ultimately invisible to everyone except those who needed it. The modification worked not because it was sophisticated, but because it was simple. It didn't require new manufacturing or engineering studies or committee approval. It required a private first class with steel mill experience and enough dead friends to overcome his fear of punishment. It required other snipers willing to copy an unauthorized modification because it kept Germans from killing Americans. It required officers willing to pretend they didn't notice because the statistics showed men surviving who would have died. This is how actual change happens in combat. Not through official channels, not through proper procedure, through enlisted men who see the problem clearly because they live with its consequences, who create solutions with whatever materials they can find, who share those solutions quietly, because regulations say they're not allowed to fix what's broken. Through officers who know when following regulations means watching men die for no good reason, except that someone wrote a manual before understanding how reality worked. The bent nail worked at 5-10 yards. 4 scouts died. American positions stayed hidden. Artillery didn't fall that night. Men who would have died kept living because a private from Gary decided a finishing nail mattered more than regulations. That's the actual story. Not heroic, not glorious, just practical, just necessary, just effective. Raymond Henry Dalton is buried in Calumet Park Cemetery in Merrillville, Indiana. His headstone lists his name, his dates, and a small notation, SGT U.S. Army World War II. No mention of innovation, no mention of the nail, just another veteran among thousands, distinguished only by a decision made in a wine cellar with